Islamism that we're seeing in the UK.
Why do they need to adjust to British culture? They don't feel the need to. Between 2007 and 11, more than 30% of British Pakistanis in Bradford were married to a first cousin.
That's insane.
When you go to certain areas in this country, they're almost unrecognisable than what they were 20, 30 years ago. They are destroying the fabric of this country.
Is it racist to be worried about that?
No, it's not racist to be worried about that.
You've just blown apart the whole of DEI, the whole of the diversity training, all of that stuff.
I think the easiest way now to prove that you're a good person is to talk about climate change, to talk about Free Palestine, and to have a BLM poster. The harder thing would be, we're just down this rabbit hole now, just constantly talking about everything bad that Britain has done and refusing to acknowledge that Britain actually did some pretty amazing things. White boys, the impact on their future right now is bleak. We're too afraid now to have logical, common sense questions about this.
Is it racist to suggest that immigrants to this country adopt its values?
No, I don't think so at all. I think we have to start to move away from this sort of obsession in terms of trying to conform to other races, other groups of people. And I think we need to start to think about the importance of British values, what they mean to you, to me, because I think otherwise very quickly we'll forget about what those are. And I think it will create a society now, and well, it is creating a society now where every day we talk Britain down. Every single day the history that's shown of Britain is negative and it's not fair. And so I think it's a very slippery slope, and I think we need more races, religions, everyone that comes to this country to essentially adapt to British values. I think we've gone too long now and too far ahead in terms of trying to prioritize these peoples, and I think because of that we're falling behind in terms of what we think of what Britain is.
Where did this idea come from that people don't need to? Because I know when we go abroad, there's always that criticism of, oh, you haven't even learned, Little England abroad, hasn't learned the languages, hasn't adopted the culture. So where has this come from? This new idea, I suppose, of, people should come over here, and to suggest that they try and learn a language or anything like that is racist.
I think it's like been brewing for maybe the last 10, 15 years in particular. I think one of the things is there's been a massive demographic change. It's changed a lot more than I think a lot of us are willing to accept, regardless of net migration figures, whatever statistics you look at. I think the bigger question is net migration is always about the amount of people coming in versus out, but lots of people are leaving this country as well. Lots of Brits are going to, whether it's Australia, Spain, and that is not being accounted for the people who are coming in terms of their different races, their different religions. So I think that's definitely played a part. I think there's also been a part of maybe, I don't like to go down, but I think lack of purpose. I think there's a lot of people in this country who are in maybe positions of power, whether it be in governments, institutions, that have lived a very privileged life, an actual privilege, an amazing life in terms of being London-centric, access to amazing jobs, access to a great country. And what they're doing is that they almost have this, disdain for the working class. And I don't think they actually sit there. For them, their purpose is BLM. For them, their purpose is the pride flag or Free Palestine. That's their purpose, because I think we've moved away from things such as trying to be a good son, being a good daughter, father, husband, mother. I think these things have just been completely destroyed. I think we've got rid of any importance of family. And I think there's also played a part in the destruction of religion, moving away from the Judeo-Christian values that this country has been formed on. And I think that whole combination has led to a general, almost like a British identity crisis, which is absurd considering the amazing thing this country has done, considering we have incredible amount of history, more than most countries do. We should not be having an identity crisis, but I think that's where we're kind of at the moment.
What is your ethnicity and background?
So I'm British born here. My parents were born in India, so British Indian, and my parents came. My mum came, I think, when she was 8, 9 years old in the 70s. My dad came in the 80s. And so, I mean, they're Hindu, so me too. And regardless of having the Indian heritage and being Hindu, I was always taught as a child, you're British first. You wear Western clothing. This is your culture. This is your, English is your language. This is your country. You have to get educated. You have to get a job. You have to provide. That was very much ingrained in me. Of course, don't forget about your heritage and where you come from and all of that stuff, but you are British first, and that's your, you have a duty to do something in this country. And so I think that was quite instilled in me from a very young age. And I think, unfortunately, I'm not sure if the large volumes that are coming into this country now, they have those same principles. I don't think I was unique in that example. I think there was plenty of the other Indian community and some of the Pakistani community as well. I think a lot of them who were coming in during the 70s and 80s would have been teaching their children this. But I think naturally, when there's such a big demographic change, there's no almost need to adapt.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to certain areas in this country, I don't think they're almost unrecognizable than what they were 20, 30 years ago. And I think that's actually not what, even if you speak to immigrants or product of immigrants who've been here for a long time, they are some of the ones who are almost most angry about this, because the reason they came to this country was to take advantage of these amazing British values, really utilize it. But now it's almost frustrating, because you're seeing those things, the reason why people came to this country all that time ago, they're now looking at this thinking, this isn't, would they have made that same decision now? Would my parents? I don't know. I'm not sure. Would many of people of my sort of generation? I'm not sure.
That's a really interesting point. The incentive, I suppose, or the need to become more part of a culture. I mean, I can imagine if I went to live in Nicaragua, I don't know, maybe I'd want to get involved in the local culture. But if the expat community was that large, with new immigrants who hadn't had other generations there, and everybody was new at the same time, they're all English, why would I bother becoming a Nicaraguan or learning what it is to be Nicaraguan?
Definitely. And I think that's a big problem in the UK. And I think what's sad and disappointing is I think we're seeing a lot of white Brits almost pandering to this, and almost, again, it seems to give them the sense of portrayal that they're a good person by pandering to this, when in actual fact they are destroying the fabric of this country. And it's getting to a point now where I think a lot of people are lost in terms of, forget about politics, just as general people, saying stuff like two genders, or saying stuff like mums in having two parents is a good thing. It's these like controversial things to say now, and I think a lot of people are just frustrated and have no idea in terms of what this country is, and it's not purely a white Brits problem. I always look at there's places across this country which never got in the news, even going as far as the Brexit referendum. You've got a place not too far from where I live, Slough, which is a town where you have more non-white Brits than white Brits, and they voted to leave the European Union. And a big part of that is because you have an immigrant population, or product of immigrants population, who are just so frustrated, who are just so lost in terms of what Britain is now becoming. So it's not just as much as the media likes to show us the far right racists that are saying this, you actually have large portions of the immigrant population in this country, or products of immigration, who are just so frustrated, because I think they understand also what life could have been like, and they know the differences maybe a bit better than the people who haven't had that experience. So they almost feel even more frustrated. And I don't think that's a specifically a more conservative person thinking. I think it's right or left. You'll see plenty of people on either side saying similar sort of things.
That's interesting. You're from a Hindu Indian background, heritage. There's obviously a lot of tension over there. There always has historically between Hindus and Muslims. But over here, I'm always hearing it's sort of the far right white people and Muslims. Do those tensions between Hindus and Muslims translate over to the UK? I don't hear much about that. Apart from, I think Leicester, there was some sort of thing going on.
Yeah, Leicester happened. Not really. I think the big difference is, again, the Muslim community. I can't, not being Muslim, it's hard to make judgments on it. But especially in the Hindu community, Hindu culture is. I can speak this on my circle, my family, and people that I know, and it's always been your religion is what you do at home as opposed to outside. You're not. I don't identify. I don't want you to see me as a Hindu, or if you do, great. It doesn't really matter. There's no kind of. It's not an identity. I wouldn't. I would say I'm Hindu, but I wouldn't it's not it's not the decisive thing of my identity. And it's the same for my parents. It's the same thing for them. They're Hindus at home. My mum's a bit more, she will pray at home, but again, she leaves that house, she's British and she's trying to provide in the society, and same for my dad, and it's a similar sort of thing. So there isn't that. I think we're quite an adaptive group of people in general. We're quite quiet, and we kind of typically, I'm stereotyping, but we generally just kind of adapt wherever we kind of go. And I think the other side of it is that kind of, there's a massive focus on education and getting a job and all that sort of in our community. And so that is a massive push that we get, bigger than, say, your religious values. My parents would be much more happier seeing me, get a very good job, contribute, pay taxes, be involved in improving the community, than me being a devout Hindu. That would not really be a massive thing for them. And I think also the religion is, although you do technically have to believe in a god to be a Hindu, the general principle is, a lot of people say, it's more of a way of a life than a religion, yoga, meditation, all that sort of stuff. So I think that makes it a bit easier to adapt.
Interesting. Whereas Islam, it seems to be more external and not just inside the house often, at least the Islamism that we're seeing in the UK.
I think because of the mass demographic change, I don't maybe necessarily think that was the case maybe 20 years ago. I think now that, because there's been such a radical shift in our demographics, that I think they are in a position to do that. If you like, there are large areas where they exist, areas like Bradford and places like this. So why do they need to adjust to British culture? They don't feel the need to. And so I think that's where our governments, whether it's been Labour and Tories, have not done a good enough job, is actually looking at the fact that this obsession with multiculturalism, there is a seriously negative impact to that. And I think we've just not, as a country, really thought about those implications. And I think that's where we kind of are now.
It's interesting that, because I think sometimes there are aspects of Hasidic Judaism which I think are concerning, but there are about 20,000 of them in the country. If there were 5 million, maybe we'd have to think about what's going on, and have to go, okay, well, you can't do some of the things, because some of the things they do in that community I don't agree with. I'm just thinking now, they all shout, I get shouted at by them whenever I say that, but it is true, they have serious issues, as any closed community can do at its most extreme. What the hell do we do now with these issues around, I suppose, growing Islam? And is it racist to be worried about that?
No, it's not racist to be worried about that. I think, lots of people will talk about, you'll hear similarly, the Islamic community will talk about this as well. It's not just an issue, it's an issue for all of us, everyone in this country. I think the focus may be less on Islam, and it needs to be more back on Britain. I think that's a bigger issue. There is a real serious lack of British pride in this country. You've got in almost every aspect. Now, it's their own personal choice to do this or not, but our England national team football manager doesn't sing the national anthem. Now, it's obviously his choice, and we shouldn't demand it, but that just feels like an example of just the lack of pride. Just singing the British anthem maybe is now perceived as political or some sort of charge, and I think that has to change. And I think the sooner our institutions acknowledge all the great things Britain did and all the great things Britain can do, I think that'll be a step in the right direction. I think we're just down this rabbit hole now of just constantly talking about everything bad that Britain has done and refusing to acknowledge that Britain actually did some pretty amazing things, just like any country, just like any group of people that have had the history that we've had. And I think, I want to see a much bigger emphasis on the amazing things Britain has done.
Yeah, my wife is Argentinian, and she loves England, absolutely loves it, loves living here. And she will come home often and report conversations with friends of hers who are English, and she cannot believe how negative they are about. And they often say, "Oh gosh, why would you come here? You were from lovely." And it could be anywhere in the world. Everyone listening has had this conversation or heard this conversation before. You're from where? Belarus, Honduras, or any country in the world. They'll be like, "Why would you leave to come here?" And it's like, what do you mean? This is then, and it's also, I don't think they realize this, but it's offensive to the person who made the decision to come here, because that person really does take pride in their new country. What are some of the things about Britain that people should be, including our history, that we should be taking pride in?
I think some of the stuff the empire did in terms of abolishing slavery is, a few things you could argue better than that. The impact.
Were we the ones then to do
Well, we
that?
abolished slavery. The British Empire had the biggest impact in terms of abolishing slavery. We did that across the continent. The stuff we did even in India. We had Indians had the something called widow burning, where essentially if the husband dies before the wife gets thrown into the fire when they're getting cremated. Yep, it's and this.
When was this?
This was early 1900s.
And where were they doing that?
In India. So they did that across there.
Hell.
Yeah. So that was something Britain university got rid of. Now there's people who will say, well, there was some areas of India that did it earlier, whatever. Britain came in and made a rule that this is banned. You cannot do this.
They threw a live woman into the fire.
Into the fire too. So, and you look at some of the stuff that, and this is the thing that lots of people will never want to acknowledge or talk about in Britain. If you actually want to, I hate talking about the empire because it always becomes a debate about how awful it is and how, and obviously we know, but in 2024 standards, an empire should not exist. It's not the right way of living. However, you got to compare it in the context of other empires, and in other empires, it's the most progressive, if you like. And I think we did Britain did some incredible things there. Even stuff like Winston Churchill, like the statue that we've got in Westminster, I always joke, is not like big enough. Like there's the impact that man had, even though I'm going to say this knowing that he said some pretty not so nice things about Indians, the Bengali famine, which he barely acknowledged or did nothing about. There's lots of things he said that were completely what we'd say now is socially unacceptable. But there is no greater man, I think, for a lot of, whether it's the Indian community, Asian community, empire community, products of the empire, if you like, that owe a massive debt to him. What would life been like had he not existed? Well, the truth is, I for sure wouldn't be here. That's a fact. I would have either been ruled by the Japanese, or India would have been ruled by Japan or Nazi Germany. That would have been the consequence. Japan were eagerly looking at India to take over.
Wow.
And you can almost guarantee that the context of life I have right now, there's no chance that would exist. So whilst I 100% agree, not every single thing Churchill said in 2024 standards was perfect and right, his impact is astronomical. And I think now, I think few people, again, are prepared to say that. I think even historians who know this won't say this, because there's that kind of fear of every single one of his texts that he said, things that are not acceptable now will get thrown in. Mm-hmm. So it's really bizarre. And I think even the point your wife makes, and it's similar to what my parents would say to me, or even what I sometimes think when I hear my Brits say this to me, and it's just like, well, you just have no concept of what the rest of the world looks like, and I'm talking history, but even today, and as much as I'm not a remote fan of this current government, this current Labour government, still this is one of the few countries in the world where you can go from being poor to relatively poor, working class to middle class, to maybe even rich in one generation, in one lifespan. And that is, in context of the world, incredible. To have that social mobility in a country is amazing. And I think we really, really don't give that enough credit. And that goes to one of the best things of British culture, is the focus on merit. And I think this is why you'll see a lot of people, not just why people get very annoyed at the quota system and stuff like that, because it completely goes against what has made Britain so amazing in the last 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, is that focus on merit. And to be able to do that in this country, regardless of your race, your religion, is incredible. You cannot say the same about lots of countries, probably the vast majority of countries in the world, that you can go up just purely based on merit in such a short space of time. It's not easy now. I know it's not. I know this government will make it hard, is going to make it harder. I know the previous government didn't, it's probably been more difficult in the last 10, 15 years for sure. But the overall concept, the overall, still the ability to, like I say, go from being poor to middle class, upper class, rich, whatever, in one span, is something we should be proud of.
What is it that encouraged you to start? Because you work outside of this thing.
Yeah.
What got you writing and talking?
So my dad was in politics right from when I was 12, 13 years old. He was a local councillor. And at the time, he was one of the very few, or maybe only immigrant conservative councillors. So at that time, I would say the Indian community is largely conservative. To be honest, I said the Pakistani community is as well. If you actually look at their social values and all of that sort of stuff, but point is in that era, it wasn't a very sociable, acceptable thing as an Indian with an Indian accent to be a conservative, let alone as a counsellor and shouting about it. So I was very involved as a child, and then as time went on, I was always just around in that circle. I loved the debates that they would have back in those days. I think it was a lot more, another great thing of, I think, British culture, the British pub culture, where you can sit there and debate and they'll just, absolutely tear lumps at each other. But it was beautiful, it was amazing, argue about climate change, and it was just anything you can think of. They would have these discussions, and it's one of the not so nice things nowadays is I don't think those discussions can necessarily be had. But I loved the debate culture. I loved the sense of community feel that I had. I felt very fortunate as well. I mean, to be born here and have this opportunity. So I always kind of had that kind of maybe patriotism. And so it was just a very natural kind of action, to be honest. I don't think there was really one thing in particular. I think I was in that environment and I just really, really enjoyed it. I did really start to read about philosophy and all of that sort of stuff, and I got really interested in just general philosophical things like how did democracy start and economics and all this sort of stuff. And to me, just all the reading that I do, the opportunities to visit other countries that I would have, every single time I just would come here and just feel, again, you're just so lucky to be born here, to have this opportunity. I've got to make the most of it kind of feeling constantly.
How does it make you feel then when you see, I mean, this morning there were videos of Greta Thunberg doing her usual thing, which is chanting aggressively about climate change, but incorporating the Hamas, well, not Hamas, it was the sort of Palestine cause and all of those things, and somehow blending all of those things together. It's a very anti-Western thing. Is that where that's all coming from?
Yeah, I think it's just that kind of virtual signaling kind of, which is just literally completely taking over our culture. Listen, I think the easiest way now to prove that you're a good person is to talk about climate change, to talk about Free Palestine, and to have a BLM poster and a pride poster. I think if you do those things, you're a good person automatically. You don't have to do anything else. You don't actually have to work hard. You don't have to sacrifice. You don't have to think about your family, your future, or anything. As long as you do those things straight away, you get a tick. And I think that's what she represents, which is that kind of what's the quickest and easiest way to prove that I'm a virtuous, good human being. The harder thing would be to actually have deep conversations with people who are different, have a different opinion to her, to sit down and study opposing views, to probably get actually a full-time job. I'm not sure if she does have a full-time job, to actually get educated, to then one day try and provide and work with a partner, whatever the gender, then one day to have children, then one day to aspire. I think that's a really hard thing to do, and that's what our parents' generation did and what other people did. Whereas now you don't have to do any of that. You just have to do what she does, and you're a good person, and you've got a tick from society. And I think that's what she does it for. I think if you actually deeply discuss to her, climate change is such a tough subject in terms of, our planet is billions of years old. To even really become a specialist expert in climate change, she's 20, I think, 21, whatever. There is no way she can have the knowledge on climate change or on the changing of temperatures to a significantly high level, as well as have a significantly high level of knowledge on what's going on in Israel in Palestine. It's physically not possible. So for her, again, it's sad that people take this seriously with people like her, but again, I think it's just it's a tick, right? She does that, and then you post about her, and you also get that tick, and you also feel good. The reality is you're doing nothing. The harder thing, like I said earlier, is to do those things I mentioned, which is to trying to aspire to actually do good stuff rather than just trying to look good.
Was that make your bed thing Jordan Peterson says?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
She's, I don't think, made her, I mean, she was too young to even make her own bed when she started doing this. I remember reading as well that her her parents said she was very difficult because she was quite severely autistic, and it made it difficult for her to be happy. And doing all this protesting made her happy. And I started to feel like it had similarities in how a lot of the gender ideology's gone as well, with regards to, I don't know, it seems to make them happy, let them do it, instead of actually parenting and saying, what are the underlying issues here? How can we help you and help you to be better and stronger? It's just like, yeah, do your thing. You go out there and tell presidents how to run their countries as a 14-year-old girl. I just, it beggars belief, really. Do you think, going back to the issue of Islam, Islam's an issue, I think. I met Tommy Robinson the other week, and I thought about him, and you know, he's like the face of racism now in this country and has been for decades. And I couldn't find a single racist thing he'd said, but he does have an issue with Islam. But I couldn't find a single thing he'd said against Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jews, and those are religions anyway, not races. And I certainly hadn't heard him say anything about races. Are we being sort of lulled into what happened in Iran and Lebanon with regards to an Islamo-left alliance, which then killed the left?
Yeah, I think so. I think Tom Robinson's a really interesting one. You know, I think that there are too many people in this country that have ignored the question of the impact of Islam and democracy, and how, whether it can actually have a relationship and what that relationship looks like. I think it's crazy because, you know, the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, and both essentially failures, we probably should have learned something from that and just said, you know, we tried to implement democratic measures in both those countries. It didn't work. And I think we have to start to ask the question of, is there actual compatibility there? I know Douglas Murray talks about it so much, and I think he's made some amazing points about it, is that simple compatibility question. I just think when you have such a large demographic of people in a community, in a country, I think the willingness or the need to adapt is just not there. So why would they? And I think that's where our governance has to be stronger. You know, there's only so much we can do about criticizing Islam and criticizing the culture and the religion, saying it's different from the West, it's different from the Judeo-Christian values which were based on. I think we have to be a bit more practical, and I think there's not really many practical measures. All the lessons have been the Iraq, Afghanistan, which is not that long ago, has happened. The influx of huge numbers of refugees, Islamic refugees in Sweden and Scandinavia and Europe has been there, and we've just ignored it. And I think we're too afraid now to have logical, common sense questions about this, and instead, the moment we had this conversation, we're both going to be branded into the Islamophobic community, and it's not fair, and it's not the right thing. And I know there's plenty of people, you know, again, going back from prior to 10-15 years ago, from the Islamic community, from the Pakistani community, from even the Bangladeshi community, that this wasn't as much of a problem. It's now becoming a lot worse because of the demographic change. And I think it's something that the impact of migration, the impact of immigration, it's no longer a right or left issue. I think it's you know, I heard Tony Blair, you know, somebody who opened our borders up onto a crazy, absurd level, and him talking about the dangerous impact of the changing of our demographic. So it's not necessarily a right or left problem anymore. And I think I would rather see us go back to discussing what Britain means to people. And I think there's plenty of people who can give a really good representation of it, plenty. And I think a bigger issue is the working class community, in particular in this country, who I think have just been, I don't know, just kicked to the side and who are just not cared about. I don't think very few people in this country, especially in the positions of power, have absolutely any idea or interest in terms of what those values are. I think it's become such big city centric in the West, not just us, London, New York, Sydney, wherever. Like these are not representations of the rest of the respective countries. And what problems a Londoner faces, what problems maybe I face, you face, is not necessarily the same as somebody down south or up north. And I think we should be open to the fact that people want different things. And when you have such a large population of people who are frustrated, you know, I know of course Labour won the last election, but you know, 80% of people in this country didn't vote for them. And I think that should be a bit of a red flag into our heads, thinking, what do those 80% of people want? And I just think people don't want to ask that question.
Well, they've mostly been branded far right now. And again, I walked down a street with Tommy Robinson just to see what it was like, and it was a particularly working class holiday resorts kind of town abroad, and they adore him. He's like their god, because they can't. I mean, voting doesn't make a difference to them. They can't get their points across. Everybody calls them far rights, and they're all thugs and all of that. So the only person speaking up to them from their community and from the same working class as them is him. So what are some of the I saw you posted some examples of places where some of the issues around Islam are with regards to unemployment, incest, things that are not British values that are going to become more prominent here.
So Bradford is one of the most worrying places in terms of we're seeing a lot of cousin to cousin marriages, which naturally when they have children, we know if it's, especially from a first cousin, the chance of a birthing defect is more than double. So this poor child comes with a disadvantage from the moment they're born.
What are the sort of percentages around that?
So I think between 2007 and 11, there was around more than 30% of British Pakistanis in Bradford were married to a first cousin.
That's insane.
Which is an astronomical amount. And this is what's interesting, because I did this post not that long ago, and naturally you're going to get the usual stuff that you get on social media. But a lot of the information I got from was from the BBC. So the BBC, they obviously would never do this now, but 10, 15 years ago, they did a documentary on the impact of cousin marriages. And Widespread did really well. It was really eye-opening. It was just, trying to educate the community to stop it. And there was some really good British Pakistanis who spoke, basically against cousin marriages that are in the documentary, who speak really well and saying, this is educated ones who are saying this is wrong, this is immoral, this is awful on the child, forget about customs and traditions that you may think are normal. We know for a fact, scientifically amazing. There is no chance that BBC would do a documentary like that now. There's no chance. They would never have the courage to. They did it before. They would not do it again. They would not do it now. And that's the really sad, unfortunate thing, is because the people who are actually going to get the pain of this are these children who have had it's not their decision that this is happening, right? And so I think that's awful. Sets a bad precedent for the rest of the country. Forget even talking about that. I think it's just that's a serious problem.
Strain on the health services, presumably, as well.
Well, strain on the NHS. Well, that was part of the documentary. There's even one on Netflix. I don't know the name, but there's one on Netflix that shows this as well, in terms of, it's a really old, again, documentary done on this in Britain, like 10, 15 years ago, on the impact of largely cousin marriages and the impact it has on children. It's really sad because you get to see the children and the consequences of that, and it's just not fair. So that's an example of it. But what's again fascinating is, we won't necessarily show much attention to that. We won't talk, which is happening in our country now, but we'll constantly talk about white privilege, white guilt, 24/7, even though white boys in this country are some of the worst performing people academically, both on literacy and numeracy rates. And I cannot emphasize how awful that is for everyone, whether you're my skin color or a different skin color, black, white, or brown, because the majority of the labor force in this country is white men, right? Naturally, white women, or women in general, tend to have children, and naturally they spend time out of the workforce. Sometimes they never return, sometimes for 3-4 years out, sometimes but 1 year, whatever. The majority of the workforce, if you're going by a gender and going by a race, it's white men. And so if the white boys are going to turn into men one day, they're getting less educated and they're getting less productive, and they're on a downward spiral. That's going to impact our economy. That's going to impact the job I can get, the job that a black person can get, the consequences of Britain in general. So, but that will never really be spoken about. That will never be addressed. It will never be really made a priority. I mean, and so if they really wanted to care about race or whatever, then that would be the target, surely. Obviously, there shouldn't be no focus on race. You should just be going to school to get educated and get smarter. But I can't help but think there is some of that, some of the decline in white boys has come from this white guilt, this white privilege, I think is making, in particular, the boys feel very low on confidence. I think it's probably making them suppressed. And these are all terrible things for boys to do. And Jordan Peterson and so many other people will talk about it much better than me. But, I think we're slowly destroying masculinity in this country. I think anything remotely masculine is considered toxic. We celebrate femininity in men and we celebrate masculinity in women. And I think on a broader scale, on a social scale, that is terrible. And I think those impact you can really see in particular with white boys. I think the impact on their future right now is bleak, and I think we should be really talking about that. And I think that should be a much bigger emphasis.
Because they're told, I suppose, that they're the only ones who are not special. And there are many schools. I mean, somebody at a Q&A last night was put their hand up and said they're a teacher. He's a teacher, and 95% of the pupils at his school are from minority backgrounds. It's just 5% are white, and they are performing much worse than everybody else. And they're constantly told, those kids, that they're not special, and the other 95% are special. And as you say, with regards to masculinity, I suppose they're told that, don't do this, don't do that, because you're being toxic. Don't be yourself. What a stunted place to be in. You can't. How can you grow? How can you breathe when you're brought up that way?
They House of Commons, I can't remember which MP it was, but they brought up a child watching Andrew Tate or something, and that became the focus of the conversation about Andrew Tate. And I just remember thinking, he has a following of millions and millions of people. Why not address why are young boys attracted to this man? Mm-hmm. Why are they? And the reason is they have absent fathers. So a lot of these, we're seeing a growing rate in the white British community of single parent households. And look, I'm not advocating for people to stay in abusive relationships, but there is no denying, no matter if you're in England, Brazil, Argentina, India, America, if you have two parents, the chance of your success is substantially more. Now, that doesn't mean you have to get married. It doesn't mean you have to live in the same place. It just means, as a father and mother, you should be present in their lives. And the stats on this are absolutely crazy. It's like 4 times more likely to go to jail if you're in a single parent household, all the way to 5 times more likely to be in poverty if you come from a single parent. Now, obviously, there's some really amazing exceptions of this, who people who beat this, but on a large scale, it's important that people have two parents. In particular, with boys, it's a massive issue, and it is a men issue in terms of men abandoning children. It is largely, in terms of genders, men not being present. So I think a lot of boys are being suppressed. A lot of boys don't have any sort of a real role model, a real male role model in their life, and so they need to find it from somewhere, and they're going to find it from the internet, or they will maybe get lost in this whole new trans ideology, constant being rammed down their throats. They're going to find, I think, whatever they're going to find in this thing is not going to be good in the long term, and that's where they should be taught from an early age to take responsibility, that you are going to, at some point in your life, going to be the only person earning money in the relationship. And so there's lots of these sort of simple little things that I think people will not say now, because again, you'll go down the far right ideology, or Andrew Tate, or even now Jordan Peterson. They're putting in a similar sort of boat, and I think it's really unfair. I think it's really harsh, and I have a lot of sympathy for boys, in particular white boys, right now, because I just don't think that there is any sort of support for them.
And it's a toxic place to go into. I think the whole Tate area. Whereas I say with Tommy Robinson, look, if you think he's racist, go and find something racist he said, and I think it's a struggle. And Jordan Peterson and J.K. Rowling, you think she's transphobic? Find me something she has said that is hateful about it. And I think with Andrew Tate, in my experience, I mean, I have heard him say things that I think are pretty not right, you know, quite abusive, and not where I'd want my son to end up going to. Whereas Jordan Peterson, I think, might be quite useful for.
Well, for sure, that's obviously, you know, Peterson's the, I think, ideal one in that scenario. But you know, I just think when that, for me, that example of the Andrew Tate situation in the UK government, for me, it just demonstrated how out of touch people really are. That they're more obsessed with this man who's built a massive following, saying, you know, questionable things for sure, but we're going to really focus on that and ban him or whatever from schools, or ban him from talking and from somebody playing a clip or something, rather than looking at the fact, why is this child, that'd be my first question. Why are you finding your male role model in this? What are you seeing is like, what's your impact at home? Like, do you actually have any other male figures in your life, any good? And I think if you ask a lot of those kids who gravitate towards Andrew Tate, I can almost guarantee a lot of them don't have actually any male role models in their life, or any good ones anyway. And I think that's why his following's grown. People don't want to look at that. Instead, they would rather just make the focus on Tate instead of a much broader, much serious issue.
And a more interesting viewpoint, like, okay, why are these boys going that way? What is pushing them to the arms of the Tates of this world? Again, the hypocrisy is insane, because often, if we talk of the woke, I know that's a simplification, but they will go out of their way to find excuses for the worst of crimes. Even the Hugh Edwards thing going on. Oh, well, he had bad mental health and all of that. That doesn't make you start messaging. I've been upset at times. I know that's not the same as bad mental health, but I know a lot of people who have bad mental health who have not started messaging, asking for pictures of kids and things like that. But, he's bad mental health and it was a stressful job and all that. He was bullying people at work. So, George Floyd, always, but yeah, maybe he did some bad things in his life, but what about before, and how he's being treated? They're willing to look at the reasons, but not when it comes to white boys, for example, because it's not fashionable right now. Also, something you said before was interesting about that documentary the BBC would no longer show. Around the same time, there was the Stacey Dooley documentary about Luton. She went back to Luton and she was walking side by side with Muslims, and it was very much portrayed as Muslims are taking over my town. And it showed a lot of them in the full sort of hijabs and all of these things, and shouting at her, shame, you're not dressed right, you need to, shame on you, and all this stuff. And since then, the Islamic population of Luton, I think, must have doubled, or it's even more than it was, and it was already so high, but the BBC wouldn't touch it. So I'm wondering now, is it that we've crossed a point? It was like that was the BBC and the mainstream maybe warning us about what might come. And now we're at a point where it's too late. You can't put that out now because the extreme Islamic population is now so high here. There's no way of doing it without causing great offence now.
I'm not sure if it's too far. I just think people are not maybe willing to take on the repercussions if they do it. I think that's one part. And I also think the other change is, I think there's a lot of people within these senior positions, whether it be the BBC or in institutions, that are just so unaware of what that impact of what's happening in Luton right now, in Bradford, because all they see is London. That's all they see, and they don't have to see Luton, they don't have to see Bradford, they don't have to see any of these things. So it doesn't really appeal to them, and it makes no interest in their social society and their group. It's not something that anyone really will talk about. They're not impacted by it, so why would they want to run that story? And especially when it's going to be an unfashionable story, so why run it? I would argue I don't think it would be an unfashionable story. I think the majority of the people in this country would agree and would want to be interested to see what's going on there. But I think, why would they? Because in their social circles and what they value, their principles, their morals, which is basically I'm white, I'm privileged, I should feel guilty, I should try and give leg up to other communities, it's my job to try and give a helping hand to everyone else. And what's interesting, the two communities that are a massive problem for the left, and not just the left, but the sort of these people in these high positions, is the Hindu community and the Jewish community. So I've done a lot of work with both in terms of the similarities they both have, which is a lot of them are generally quite adaptive. A lot of them generally get on with their day-to-day life. It's not, although they pray at home or pray in their place of worship, they adapt on a very good scale in this country, and they're some of the most successful people in this country. So they on average do better in almost every single example you can think of in this country, whether it's education, whether it's jobs, whether it's least likely to go to jail. You can almost find any parameter. Hindus and Jews will outperform Christians or white Christians in this country. So for the left, that is a massive problem, because for them that kind of gets rid of the idea of critical race theory. It gets rid of the idea that this country is institutionally racist or systemically racist. It gets rid of the concept that they need a helping hand. So that's why in my opinion, what you'll see with the coverage of both Israel and India, where there are, the large portion of Jews and Hindus in their respective countries, the media coverage of those countries will always be largely negative, because they know that these are two groups of people that you cannot tie down to this. They are racially being punished, and I think that's why for them these two races cause a problem in terms of their metrics, whereas the other communities don't necessarily have that issue with, so they can play the sympathy card, they can play we're here to save you, we're here to help you, this kind of moral virtuous thing that we talked about earlier, and I think that's another part of it, but I think again a massive focus talking, when BLM, those riots were happening in this country, of something that happened in America, everyone wanted to talk about the impact of the problem with white people and the way they treat black people in this country. No one wanted to look at some of the deeper lying issues. They didn't want to look at the fact that Black Caribbean children in this country are the highest group of people that are raised by a single parent, between over 60%, and they suffer because of this. The community with one of the lowest single parent households is the British Indian community, between 6 to 8%, and on the scale wise, they perform very well. They outperform British white people. It's more than just race, it's more than just even the parent. I think that plays a massive role, but I think there's some really, if you actually really dig a bit deeper and we really look at culturally what goes on, there's such stark differences, and I think BLM should have highlighted that, and it should have highlighted that fact that Black African community does a lot better than a Black Caribbean community. There's a reason why Black Nigerians are doing very well in this country, so are Black Ghanaians. There's so much more to it, but again, it's not the fashionable thing to talk about. It's not socially trendy. It's a lot easier to post a black box on Instagram, Twitter, and to have a Black month, history month or whatever, rather than sitting there saying, you know what, why don't we look at why certain communities within the Black community are doing better and some are doing worse? Why is it other ethnic groups are doing, what can we learn from this? There's so much more. Instead, the easy cop-out is doing what Greta Thunberg does, which is posting the more socially trendy things.
I think what you've just said, you've just blown apart the whole of DEI, the whole of the diversity training, all of that stuff, just blown apart by what you've just said. I mean, the fact that Black Africans do so much better than Black Caribbeans, just it's screaming at us that it is not race that is the issue here. It is not race. It is culture. It is parents. It is community, and all of those things. And we should be instilling those values in people. How obvious is this?
They're completely different, right? And I obviously I'm generalizing, but if you look at the Black African community, they are very family focused. If any Nigerians, Ghanaians, they are so family focused. There is a sense of pride. There is a sense of emphasis on education, and there's no surprise that they perform better, right? They're not isolated. They have a collective community. They generally are probably more religious than the Caribbean, although Caribbeans can be fairly religious as well. They have a very, very British way of thinking and acting, and hence why they do a lot better. They also, going back to the two-parent household stats, they're considerably lower. They're not at more than 60%, and it is largely men, abandoning children, and that is a bit of a completely cultural thing, because in the African community, that is seen as a horrible thing to do. The man is almost kicked out of the community if he does that, if he abandons a child. It's a very different kind of community, and I think what I hate about the diversity inclusion stuff is, you ask a lot of people, a lot of different colored people, and they would say it is degrading. The concept that me as a brown person or a Black person get a job based on skin color and not on merit, to me, the first thing I would be thinking and saying is, am I not good enough on my own merit? I don't want a job because I'm Indian or I'm brown, or I'm certain most of the Black community would say the same thing. But instead, it's this kind of, you're a victim. We need to show you're a victim, and we want to help you. But what the Jewish community and the Hindu community demonstrates, we don't want that help. We don't need it. We just want to create a nice, good structure that is encompassing for everyone and that is based on merit. And I think that's a serious problem for the left, because it kind of just destroys their ideology at the moment.
That's true. Although I think some of them, especially when they get into the anti-Semitic area, far left, it almost feeds into their ideology, doesn't it? But it was interesting. I had, because another demographic we've not spoken about because it's not that typical in Britain is the East Asian community, which you get in America, I think, a lot more. I don't know. I had Rob Henderson on recently, and he's adopted American, but one of his parents was, I can't remember where from exactly in East Asia, but I can't remember. I don't want to get it wrong, but I'm going to say Korea. I can't, because I watched a movie where somebody thought they were adopted from China and they were from Korea. So maybe that's changed my memory. But he came to realize recently that one of his parents was actually Mexican. And he was saying, like, he jokingly, like facetiously, he said, "Oh God, if only I'd known that when I applied for college," because nobody cares about East Asians because they don't count for the DEI, for the woke stuff. They don't want to forget that the East Asians exist because they outperform everyone. Yeah. So that didn't help him at all. But if he could have said he was Latino, Hispanic, it might have gotten him extra credit and gotten into university or something.
Well, it's a great example because they're the ones they're the affected, almost like the Hindus and Jews, and here it's like the East Asians are definitely having this problem in America. And again, why do East Asians, in particular America, do so well? There is a massive focus on their family, household, education. I think, again, without generalizing, I don't think there's many races that have a bigger emphasis on education than East Asians. And so naturally, they're probably going to do well in education if they have such an emphasis on it. But again, it feeds into narrative. Because they don't need a handout, because they don't need help, they're going to be pushed to the side, and they will get, as we're seeing, probably more racial abuse. They'll get more vicious treatment because they don't need help. They don't want help. They've left these countries because they've seen a better opportunity to come here in the West, and that's all they want. They want opportunity. They're so happy to have opportunity, and to them, they're going to do whatever it takes to maximize that opportunity. I think that's the mindset with a lot of East Asian community, Indian community, lots of different communities. And I think what the diversity inclusion stuff is doing is it's being unfair, and it's taking away how important merit is to a lot of these races and these groups. They don't have the beauty of merit systems in a lot of these countries. That's the harsh reality. And so to then get the opportunity of merit, I think is something that we should really cherish and should be proud of. And I think more white Brits should be so proud of the fact that we're in a country where merit was the most important thing. I still think it is in the vast majority of all sectors and things, but there is definitely a shift we're seeing, whether it's in politics, government, academic institutions, but there is definitely a shift there. And I think that should really be called out by anyone and everyone.
One of the issues that you've called attention to is the unemployment levels in Muslim women in particular. What's going on there?
Well, so I used that stat, and again, I seem to anger a lot of people about it. But I wanted to compare it to Christian women because they're the majority of the next biggest religion, the biggest religion in this country, and they have 27%. And it's not unemployment rate where it's the people who are trying to seek a job. This is people who part of that is the unemployment rate, but it's also people who are wanting to be homemakers or recently just had a child and are at home. Whereas with the Islamic community, it's 70%. It's considerably higher than it is in the Christian women, which culturally there's clearly a clash there. Culturally there's a difference. I actually thought of all the things I mentioned about the cousin marriages, those things were a lot more important and a lot more serious. I don't think there's anything wrong with women being at home and playing the role of homemaker in those instances, but I think I wanted to highlight the real stark differences in terms of whether it's values, whether it's culture that's going on in this country. I'm not sure if that 70% stat would be the same if the number of Islamists in certain pockets of this country would be as high. I think if they were more spread out, or if they were from different communities, Islam's a massive religion that you go to places in the Middle East is completely different than what it is in Asia. And I think if you had a much more spread out version of that, I'm not sure if that stat would be as high as it is. But like we said earlier, why would you adapt when you don't need to?
Muslims do appear to be much better integrated in the States, where I imagine it's more spread out and it's people from
great example
parts. Yeah.
Well, that's a great example of America. Definitely have a much more not divided, but they adapt a lot better in America for sure. Whereas I think in here we definitely have much bigger pockets. you go to places in this country where the Muslim population is less than 1%. We forget about that. Britain is more than 80% of it is white. It's hard for a lot of people to understand that, because the news is all London, Manchester, Birmingham, big cities where there are a massive population of minorities, but the vast majority of the country is white. And I think it'd be really good for your mainstream media, your politicians, to actually acknowledge and understand that. And unfortunately, they won't, because again, it's just not. They're not interested. And I think that's where I think, again, with the riots that happened recently, with what happened in the last election, it almost seems like almost like a disdain or hatred towards the working class. I don't know how else to describe it, which is really sad, because the most amazing thing of this country, in my opinion, one of the most amazing things is that you can be working class and you can actually have a good life. And that's not something that you can say in other countries. And you can, even in this country, go from working class up the ladder. Although it's a lot harder now, you can still do that. But I don't think they seem interested in that.
Should we be worried for the future? Because the Islamic population is having children at a vaster rate. The white population it's just slowing. And more immigration is coming. We've got, last year I think it was 1.2 million people, and a large percentage of that was people from Islamic regions. What's the future here? And should we be concerned?
We should be concerned. I think that the big thing that we should be doing is, I think, going back to some of those more, well, now we perceive traditional British values. I don't think they're remotely traditional. I think they're quite common sense. But I think we should be, whether it's at school level, education level, I think there needs to be a redefining what men and women are. Like, I think we've now gone so far in terms of making men masculine and men feminine and women masculine, that I think we just have a lost society, I think, in this country. Other communities, Islamic community, there's a very clear definition. You could argue almost too clear in terms of the limitations between the gender. There obviously shouldn't be that in this country. But I think until we start to have serious conversations of why family is important, why the two genders, why we have two genders, and why that is what we have, and there isn't nothing in between or nothing else, until we start to have serious conversations about the importance of merit, I think a lot of these problems can go away quite quickly. I just think it just takes courage. And what I hope, being optimistic, happens is, with 4 or 5 years of this government, I think the frustrations in this country continue to grow. And I think we almost start to understand. It's almost like you push people to the limit, and you push them to this sense of feeling hopeless and lost, and then the light comes. I think it's almost, I think we're seeing more and more, I think, bigger brands, institutions speaking out against us, which is amazing. I think people are surviving the cancel culture. In many cases, they come back even stronger than they were pre-being cancelled.
But all of these issues, I agree that they help the sort of population that's already here. But does that necessarily help? Let's say, look, 1.2 million people coming in a year, many with very different ideas, anti-Western ideas. Over the next 10 years, that's another 10, 20 million people, 10, 15 million.
Well, that's where you would hope, and people understand the impact that that's having. And when it starts to maybe impact them directly, which it will, I don't think the rate in which the demographics changing, it's going to come to a point where it's going to affect everyone, and it's going to be negative. And I think at that point, maybe we'll see a change. I hope it's not too late by then. I don't think it will be. But I look at, like, Italy, for example, with the strong leadership they have, and it's taken them a very long time to adopt that stance. I hope it doesn't take the same for us. But the beauty of the West and the beauty of what we're founded on is, it won't take too long for that to, in my opinion, to go back. It's like every year is like the end of the monarchy. Every year this is going to be the year where we're no longer going to have a monarchy. And it's how many years is that? Like, when, as soon as the Queen dies, within a short period, we're going to, everyone loves a Queen, no one likes Prince Charles, and so we're going to have a new, we're going to get rid of the monarchy. It's still standing, and it's still going to stand in next year and the year after. So I think some of the realities, when it really starts to impact people on a day-to-day basis, even those people in those powerful, privileged positions, like it did in Italy, like it's doing across the whole of Europe, like it's doing in Germany, like it's doing in some of those places, they'll be forced to act. And hence why Scandinavia, which everyone loves to talk about, lovely Scandinavia, but they have some of the strictest immigration policies now. You look at what the Danish ministers are doing, even what Sweden want to do. They're trying to limit their migration by a very, very, very strong way of socially right-wing, if you like, thing we're doing. And I have no doubt that will happen in this country. It won't take that much. I don't think it would be as bad as it was for those guys as it would be for us in terms of for us to act. But I'm filled still with some sense of optimism. Maybe not for the short, immediate future.
That we won't become Iran.
No. I think the short, immediate future, I do worry for sure. But I think over a long-term period of time, I don't.
We shall see. I've got one more question for you, but first, where can people get your work?
So just on Twitter, Instagram is the same at Sunil Sharma UK. So yeah, just follow me on there, and you can see some of the stuff I get up to.
Who is a heretic you admire?
Heretic you admire? Well, I'm gonna pick an easy one. In Jordan Peterson, I think he's just. I just think we had like the age of enlightenment, you had like the age of reason going back like 1700s, 1800s, and they were so impactful. These people who said, we should look at science, we should look at logic, we should question some parts of religion, we should ask questions of what they're doing, and we should look at education. And I think that was so empowering in that era. And people like Jordan Peterson have done a similar thing for, I think, the 2000s. I think the power and impact he's had is astronomical. I hate now he's almost being demonized and being pushed in terms of this, what people are doing to him. And so I think he's impacted and changed so many people's lives for the better. The one I would like to say, but I think I almost have to wait till the allegations are fully over and stuff, is Russell Brand. I think that's another one I would really, I think what's happened to him in terms of the way, he was celebrated when he was somebody who had a drug, alcohol addiction. He was somebody who celebrated when he was a womanizer in front of everyone's eyes, had this playboy lifestyle. He was celebrated when he was doing all of that. And then he decides that he wants to be a good father, husband, wants to be a good person, morals, wants to question lots of different things. That's when they decided to essentially ruin a man's life, or try to ruin a man's life. So, I think that takes serious courage to do his journey, and I think I definitely really admire that, and I feel really not so nice of what's going on with him now in terms of, let the allegations be true or false or whatever, let's wait to that, but to demonize him and to do what he's done, to do what they're doing to him now, I think is horrible. And I really admire that whole journey he's done, even if I've not agreed with every one of his political stances. I think just to see him turn into this, we should be celebrating the version of Russell Brand that exists right now, but we are not. Instead, we celebrated the one that was doing very questionable things 20 years ago or 10 years ago, whenever it was, whereas now he's trying to be good, virtuous, moral, raise children, be a good father. He seems to be a good husband, and all these things, questioning governments, questioning everything, questioning where does power come from, and instead we're vilifying him. So
culture changed around him, and we've all applauded and laughed while he was talking about, and I know it's comedy, so it's not real, but I think it was apparent he was getting up to those kinds of things. And then the culture changed, and suddenly we're looking back at what he did during a time when people seem to allow it. The only thing I'd say though with that is, it is hard to prove those kinds of things from those women. So I just don't know. And if some of those accounts are true, I know it's the past, and we've all had a bad past, or we've all done things.
If they're true, he should be criminally charged, and he should face the consequences. No chance. No denying that.
But you can't always prove it. That's the
you
thing.
You can't always prove it. But I just find it very interesting that when all this stuff was happening, everyone essentially turned a blind eye. No one cared. No one really paid attention to it. But it was celebrated.
That's the culture change.
Yeah,
and
we loved it.
He must feel like the rug's been pulled out from under him, because he must feel like, well, you were all clapping. Yeah. That's why I did it. And
now I'm trying to be good. Now I'm actually trying to live a.
But some of those descriptions though, of like his eyes just turning black, and he just doing these things to women. So we don't know. We don't know.
Like I said, that's why I think it's clear with until these allegations are cleared up. I hope they are, because I like the, maybe it's just me being hopeful, but I like the journey change, and I think that's something we should celebrate. And that's why I'm really hoping they clear as soon as they can, because I think that journey change is like really can be really inspiring for a lot of people. Or if it's proven not the case, then
depressing for a lot of people.
Depressing for a lot of people.
A contentious Russell Brand point to end on. People, please do go follow Sunil Sharma on Twitter, and we'll put the links below. And hit the like. Keep watching this channel.